Here we find Herod ordering the drowning of Mariame's brother Aristobulus. And this tells us first that Herod's paranoid, and secondly that he's capable of murder, even though the evidence is rather circumstantial.
The evidence would hardly stand up in a court of law, but there was worse to come. Five years later, Rome had a new ruler. Octavian had defeated Mark Antony. Herod immediately switched his allegiance from Mark Antony and went to pledge his loyalty to Octavian. Josephus says Octavian was impressed and confirmed Herod as king of the Jews. This was a risky step for Herod. He left Jerusalem fearing Octavian's retribution for supporting his enemies. In fact, Herod left secret orders for his wife, Mariamne, to be killed if he did not return alive. Josephus writes that he could not bear the thought of her being with anybody else.
The relationship between Herod and Mariamne was, by all accounts, volatile, intensely volatile, one might say. It was not, as Josephus put it, of a calm nature. Herod was deeply in love with Mariamne. His love was intense and passionate.
On his return, Herod was horrified to discover that Mariamne had learned of his plans to have her killed. Their marriage fell apart. She stopped sleeping with him.
I do feel in his heart of hearts that Herod may have slightly resented Mariamne for not loving him with the intensity that he loved her. But that again reveals something about Herod, I think, the fact that he has a very difficult time comprehending other people's emotions, almost as if his view of the world is that everybody should accede to his wishes and be what he wants them to be.
Increasingly jealous, Herod put Mariamne on trial. Mariamne was brought before her own husband on a trumped-up charge of adultery. The penalty was death. Herod's sister, Salome, was the chief witness against her. Mariamne's mother, Alexandra, made a dramatic appearance at the trial and testified against her own daughter. Josephus saw this as a reflection of Herod's hold on Alexandra. She too was on his death list and probably incriminated her daughter to save her own life. Herod declared Mariamne guilty and ordered her execution. She was just 25 years old and had given him 5 children in 7 years. Josephus writes movingly that Mariamne was calm and serene as she went to her death. If Herod could kill his own wife, then perhaps he could murder rivals for his throne.
I see the turning point in Herod's life without doubt being his ordering of the murder of Mariamne, and he begins down the avenue of his ruin from then on. I think I think the ordering of that murder determines a lot of his psychological life from then on. It determines a lot of his motives from then on.
But Herod might argue, in mitigation, that the killing of Mariamne was not a cold-blooded murder, but a crime of passion. And indeed, Josephus reports that Herod grieved for her loss. Apparently, Mariamne's death tore Herod apart. He was consumed with remorse and refused to believe she was dead. He wandered the palace, calling her name.
It does, to some degree, redeem Herod's character. He's not thoroughly unlikable. He is capable of love. He is capable of grief. He is absolutely undone by her death. And so we feel more warmly towards him because we don't see him as this vile beast any longer. We see him as this suffering person.
While the killing of Mariamne doesn't make Herod a mass murderer, Josephus records that it did push him dangerously close to the edge.
He's psychotic. He's hearing voices. He's deeply depressed. He's incapable of carrying on public affairs any longer. So this is a true psychotic break. It's a definite turning point, and it cements his fate.
Herod was by now seriously ill. His behavior was erratic, and there were reports of heavy drinking. His enemies sensed he was losing his grip on the country. Some even thought he'd lost his mind. For the first time, there was a bold attempt to seize his throne. The way Herod reacted gives the clearest indication yet of whether he could kill in cold blood. With Herod lying ill, Mariamne's mother made a wild bid for power. Alexandra declared herself queen, proclaiming that the king was no longer mentally fit to rule the country. Josephus says she made a fatal mistake. Her action brought Herod out of his lair, fighting. Without so much as a trial, he had Alexandra executed. But that only served to increase the risk of a coup. When he was 65, Herod's constant fears were confirmed when he heard that his two sons from his marriage to Mariamne were plotting to assassinate him and seize the kingdom. These were his own sons, from the woman he had loved.
It's good to remember that Herod, in the later part of his life, was completely unhinged. He believed in solving problems through violence. He was also deeply paranoid. So when rumors are flying about possible efforts on the part of his son to seize power from him, Herod falls back on the behaviors that have worked for him psychologically in the past.
Herod decided to act. He had his two sons executed. In this same year, just 8 miles away, in a manger in Bethlehem, a woman named Mary gave birth to a baby she called Jesus. When the wise men arrived at Herod's court, they met a king who had killed his wife and murdered her brother and her mother. Just months before, he had also killed 2 of his sons. If Herod could kill his own children, it doesn't require a great leap of faith to believe that he could also have killed the children of Bethlehem. But if he did, the mystery is why such a horrific episode is reported only in the Gospel of Matthew. Why is the story absent from all other contemporary historical sources? Some scholars now believe that despite everything we know about Herod's paranoia and brutal crimes, there was in fact no massacre in Bethlehem. They believe 2 different accounts of the killing of children got confused in the retelling of the story through the ages.
I find it very suggestive that the birth of Jesus and the execution of 2 of Herod's children may have taken place in the very same year. One of the things that might be happening in the Christian story about the massacre of the innocents at Bethlehem is that the horror of a father executing 2 of his own children has got transferred into the story of the birth of Jesus and has become the story of the execution of a bunch of children at the time of the birth of Jesus.
There's another possibility. Perhaps the massacre did take place, but the historian Josephus deliberately left it out.
It's possible because Josephus is interested in the important people, the powerful people, kings and successors and rivals and allies, and a little event in a nowhere town like Bethlehem with little people is not something that is particularly important in the grand scheme of things. So it could be that it fell through the historical cracks in that way.
But the massacre of children, even in a small town, is certainly worthy of some notice. The Gospel of Matthew does not say how many children were killed. Later accounts, however, insist that the numbers were huge. The Greek Orthodox Church says Herod killed 14,000 boys. The Syrian Church speaks of 64,000. And later, medieval authors went as far as 144,000. But maybe the massacre was not on the scale that any of those traditions suggest. Biblical historian Olu Peters approached this question by looking again at Matthew's account of the killings in the original Greek.
The word massacre at times connotes the idea of thousands of people that may have been killed. But if you go back to the Gospel of Matthew, the word that is used there is anaireo. That's the Greek word, not to be translated as massacre, but as the killing of infants. That word can be used for even the killing of one person. So the word as it is used in Matthew does not give you the idea of thousands being killed.
In fact, demographic clues from first-century Palestine reveal that Bethlehem was a small village with a population between 300 and 1,000. At any given time, the number of babies under the age of 2 would be only between 7 and 20. So numbers alone may be the reason why Josephus does not mention the murders. That's still not enough evidence to convict Herod beyond a reasonable doubt, but he certainly had the motive and the cold-blooded capability. And for some historians,